All right, so now let's get to the second part of this question is how do we build now a function that will split first, middle, and last names? And basically we want a function similar to some of this like filter, sequence, basically the ones that spill the array and get you all the results with a single function. So to understand what I'm doing in this video, we need to know a few VBA functions, and they are all somehow connected to arrays. So if you don't already know VBA arrays, I did my previous video that covers the basics, so that should get you caught up. So let me just delete some of this. So now that we have this array, for example, of people, where it has 3 elements inside of it right here. So one of the functions we need to know in VBA is UBound. And I'm gonna actually use this right in our debug prints to make this simpler. So let's just get rid of this and right in here, let's do UBound. And let's just put that array people inside of this function, just like this. So right now, see, I have this array with 3 elements in this. And if I do UBound of this array and I run this, see, I get a 3. And basically what it gives me, it's the upper bound of this array. So similar to this, there's also LBound function. So if I just do this and rerun this, let me just get rid of this 3. See, it gives me 1. So UBound gives me the upper bound here, and LBound gives me the lower bound right here. Now, this is gonna work like this for a single dimensional array like this. If you have multi-dimensional array, then you need to provide the dimension. So to give you an idea, let's look at this. See, we have this population, and we're doing this 2-column situation. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to take this and let's just do UBound and try to do population. And you're going to see that we're probably going to get an error. So I'm going to do debug print and this. So if I run this function now, it gives me 1. That would refer to this first upper bound, I guess. So it doesn't give me an error. It just gives me the lower bound and the upper bound of what seems to be the first dimension. Now, if you wanted to get for the second dimension, you should be able to do that by doing something like this. Let's give this a shot. So I'm going to go ahead and rerun this. That gives me 0. Let's change this to UBound. And you can see I get a 2, which refers to this I, which is really this 2 right here. So see, I'm doing the second dimension. So I'm doing UBound, I'm giving the array, and then I give the dimension, so 2. So apparently if we don't provide this, it automatically defaults to the first right here. So that's one thing we need to know. And the second thing we need to know is a function that's called split. So let's just go to the top here so I can explain you this. So let's say we have a string, some sort of text. So if I take this text and run a function split on it, let's do something that's not reserved here. So that should do that. And let's just try to run this to see what we get. So I'm going to do F8. So that ran. Now, if you look here in my locals right here, we have this results variable, and you can see we get how, are, you as 3 different things in this in array sort of structure. So the reason for that is because by default, the split function will have this delimiter as a space. Now you could use other characters to do the split. So for example, if you wanted to split by commas, this comma and this comma, these 2 commas, then if I wanted to split by the comma, I would just provide a comma character here. And then if I do F8, see this res right here in the bottom. See, it has how, and then are you, which is this part right here. And then we got John with a space. If you don't provide anything, by default, it defaults a space. You can also do the space like this. So if I run this again now, that should split by spaces. So I'm going to get how, then R, then U, and then John. And just to show you that, see, it's right here. We got how, R, U, John. So the main thing we want to take away from this is that this variable at this point is going to be an array. So if we do something like res, actually let's do debug print, and then simply just run this thing. See, it gives me the first thing, how. If I change it to 1, that should give us the second thing, which is going to be R. So since this is going to be an array, then we can basically work with it as an array. And the main thing to take away from this is that we can take a text, and then we can split the text using some sort of character, and then the results of that is going to be an array. Now, let's try to also split this by a character that does not exist in this text. So let's say I want to split it by exclamation sign. Now, I'm going to remove this debug line because there's nothing to debug really, but we'll do F8 to see what happens with this. So if I look inside of this res right now to see what happened, see, that gives us basically the whole thing. So it didn't split anything, just gave us the string as is. And the last thing I want to show you here, let's say we're going to do a space as a split. See, it's going to split it into 4 parts because we have 3 different spaces here. Let's just confirm that. See, we got 4 parts, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, if I go here in the split function after the comma, there is this optional argument limit. So what I can do, I can limit how many things is the max split. So if we have 14 spaces, do we want to really split it 14 times? So let's do something like this. I'm going to go ahead and do something like 2. And now if I run this and look inside of this res, see, I got how and then the remaining text. So I just did a limit of 2 pieces after the split. Now, if I do limit 3 and rerun this, and look inside of that same res, see, we got 3 pieces right here in the bottom because, well, the limit is 3 now. So we can also use this limit inside of the split function. All right, so now that we know this, let's get to building our function. So what are we trying to do? So I'm going to go to the sheet 2, and here we have some example names. See, we have first name, last name. We also have first name, middle initial, last name, or you could call it middle name, whatever. So what we want to do, we want to just go here and do something like split names, open parentheses, refer to this name, close parentheses. And when I hit enter, I want this to spill this array of first name, middle name, last name into this cells to the right. And as you can see, that did not work. And I get a name error because there is no function called split names in Excel. So now we're going to build that function. So I'm going to go to my Visual Basic editor, and I'm going to get rid of all of this. And we're going to create a function, split names. And this function is going to accept an argument. And that argument should be some sort of text. And we need to provide the type of the variable here. I'm going to do string because it's going to be text. Now, at that point, what's going to happen, this variable txt is going to be the string we're working with. So, for example, assuming we're dealing with this first example, when we split this, we're going to get this first, middle initial, and last name. So if we do that split function, basically we'll get 3 pieces out of it. However, if we split this one that doesn't have a middle initial, there's not going to be 3 pieces. It's only going to have 2 pieces. So what we can do, we can split and then check how many pieces we got. And based on that, we can decide whether we have first and last names or do we have middle names in here too. So I'm going to go back in here and take this txt variable and we'll run that split function over this. So I'll create a variable again, res, and then I'll do split, and we'll do that txt variable. And I'm gonna use a delimiter here, which by default is a space anyways. And I'm also gonna apply a limit to this in case there's like some extra stuff in there, so it doesn't keep creating like 17 of these. One other thing I'm gonna do here as well, I'm gonna actually put this txt variable inside of a function trim. This is a built-in function in VBA that will remove all the leading and trailing spaces and also convert all the extra spaces in the middle to a single space. So this way I can actually trust when I split it, I'm gonna get the result I should get. So at this point, once we split, we can check how many results we got. And the way we can do that, we can take that res that we have and put it inside of this UBound, which will give you the upper bound size of this array, right? Just to check that this is actually doing what it's supposed to do, let's actually just return this. So I'm going to take the split names and I'm going to make it equal to the results of this upper bound of that array, like this. So let's go back and take a look and see what it looks like. So try to run this again. See, we got 2. And let's just drag this down. And for this, we got 1. Let's actually also do one that has just one name. Let's see what happens then. So we got 0. So it's always one less. And the reason for that is because the array index, when it splits, starts from 0. So when we think 3 parts here, we think 0, 1, 2. So the upper bound is 2 for this. And then this is 2, this is 1, and this is 0. So now based on this, we know whether we have just one thing, 2, or 3 things, looking at these numbers. And if we want this function to spill 3 different things right here, we need to basically return an array with 3 elements. This being the first one, second, and third one. So I'm going to get back to this, and I'll just save this upper bound in here in a variable. So I'll create this variable name count, and I'll save it in a variable like this. So later on, we can use this variable multiple times if we wanted to. So what I'll do, I'll create an array here. Since this is going to be an array, we'll do something like this. Now, I know this array is going to have 3 things in it, so I can just do this right away here without having to resize this thing. So I'll do 0 to 2, 0, 1, 2. And I'm going to do a few if statements here. So I'm going to say if that name count equals to 2, then, so if it equals to 2, then we know that it has first name, middle initial, and the last name. So what we'll do, we'll just set the person 0, which is where the first name is going to be. Actually, let's start with the 2, which is the last thing. So I'm going to take the last thing and make it the last thing from the results we split in here, which will be from that res 2, just like that. So I'll get out of this if statement. I'll do another one below this. I'll actually just copy paste this. So I'll say if name count equals to 1, which means we have 2 things in there, so 0, 1. So in that case, we have first name and last name, but no middle name. So what should happen is that the last thing should still be the 2 here, but the results, we're going to get just a 1 because we have first and last name in our results. So 0 will be the first name, 1 will be the last name. And we need to also make the first person to the first person name, which I could do here. Actually, let me do it here, and then we'll probably move it. So I'm going to say person 0 is the result 0. So if we get 2 results, we'll put the first one in the first column and the last one in the third column. And then no other results in the middle there. And we need to actually change this because this needs to be 2-dimensional. But for now, let's just leave it at this. So if I wanted to look at this one, this would be very similar. So I'm just going to copy this. And we would put the first name, last name, the last name. So this will be just the same positions for everything. So we'll just do 0, 0, 1, 1, and 2, 2, like this. And then finally, we have the case when it's just 0. If we just had one thing, we would just place it in the first column like this. Now, since all of these 3 if statements are just putting the first 0 of person 0 in this res 0, and the same thing happens here, and the same thing happens here, then what I'm going to do, I'm just going to exclude it from all of the statements. And then not do an if statement here, because that's kind of the same thing for all of them. Like this. And then once we're done with placing everything in the right place, we'll just return person, which is that new array. Now, the problem with this array is that in order for this to work, we need to have an array that has 2 dimensions, because we're trying to return this in a spreadsheet, that has 1 row and 3 columns. And the way we would have done that, we would create the first dimension is the row dimension. So this would be 0 to 0. And the second dimension would be this 0 to 2, which are the columns. Because now this is going to be 2 dimensions, we need to also do that same thing for all of these. So it's going to be 0, 1, then 0, 2, 0, 2, and then finally, again, 0, 0, which will be the first row, first column, like this. Let me actually move this down so we can see this whole thing in a single piece, like this. Now let's go check if this works. I'm going to go back and try to rerun this. Here we go. We got first, middle, last name. Let's drag this down. This is empty. And again, that's empty because we said if we get 2 things, so the upper bound is 1, so 0, 1, then we want to just place that in the third column right here. This name that we get, that second name. And that's why it is in the right place. Now, I'm also curious what happens if we have nothing. Okay, so we got an error here for this empty cell. And we should be able to take care of that, I guess, with like if error. We could just say if error, then leave it blank. So now we have a function, so as you can see, that basically split those names. And if we had like something like this, it would still be inside of this column because I did that limit of 3. So that should create the function, basically, that just spills the array. Now, I'm going to take this to the next level by doing this as an array function instead of a single name function. And what I mean by that is that what if we just try to do this and hit enter? Right now, it's not going to work. We're going to get an error, but I'm trying to get this whole list of names, and I want it to split this just like that. So what I'll do, I'll just do another function. I'll just keep this one as is. And this is going to accept that whole range as a range. And what we'll need to do, we'll need to basically just go through that whole range, split the names one by one. And as we do that, we need to basically create a whole array and place it back in a spreadsheet. So to figure out how large that array should be, we need to figure out how many things we have in this range that is being passed to us. So if this range has, for example, let's just do this as a shorter range here, 4 things, then we need an array that has 4 rows to return it back. So if I just scroll down, for example, to this line right here, this is where we used to declare the array that needs to be returned. And we did 0 to 0 because we wanted 1 row sort of function. But now I want this to be as many rows as necessary to basically fill this up. So to do that, I'm going to first declare this like this. This way we don't know the size and we can resize it to what it needs to be. And then I'm going to create a variable. And this will be just taking that range And out of that range, we'll just see how many rows are in that range. So we should be able to do rows.count, or count large, I guess. And that should give us the number of rows in that range selected. So based on that, we're going to declare the new array. I'm going to do that from 1 to that I for number of rows. And then the second one, I'm going to go 0 to 2, which is the columns. And I'm doing 0, but you could do 1 to 3, I guess. Since we did 1 to I guess let's do 1 to 3. So this will have now the correct array size for our return array. So now we should be able to fill up that array by iterating through that range of values and getting the results. So to iterate from that range that's selected, we're going to do a loop. And here I'm going to do a for each loop. So what I'm doing, I'm running a loop through this RNG variable, which is this range. And I'm saying for each, actually, let's just call it cell. I was just going for like short for name, but I'm going to do cell. That's fine. For each cell in that range, basically, we're going to run this loop. And every time it's going to be one of those names. And what we'll do with that name, basically, we'll just take that and put it in the array over here that we had declared. And that is going to be pretty much what we were doing here for the most part. When we split, then we get this if statements, we fill it up. That's pretty much where we are. So I'm going to copy most of this, go here and paste it inside of this for loop. Once we're in this loop, instead of this txt, we need to get the value in the cell. So we'll just do cell.value right there. And again, we'll trim, we'll split, we'll get the results in this variable. And then we're going to get the count in that. And we're not going to do this because we had declared that in here already. And again, we'll check the name count. So we'll say if it's 2, then we need to put it in this person. Now this time, however, we're not going to have this row 0 that we had before. We need to get in the current row in this. So what I'll do, I'll just do like a starting row on top here, and I'll make it 1 to start with. And then I'll just copy this. Actually, let's just call it current row. And we'll start with 1. And what we'll do, instead of this 0 right here, we'll just pass that current row. And once we're by the end of this for loop, we'll take that variable current row and we'll basically just increment it by 1. So we'll just take that and add 1 to it to go to the next line. So this way, this is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That will be the row number. Now column numbers are a little different. I used to do 0, 1, 2. Now in this one, I did 1, 2, 3 just to go with this 1 notation. So that means this that I did that used to be 1, it's really going to be 2. This is going to be 3. This is going to be 3. And this is going to be 1. So these are actual, like we can think about columns. Put it in the first column, second column, third column now. We don't have to count from 0 because I declared it starting from 1. This one is still going to be starting from 0 count on the right because when we use the split function, it's just going to do the regular splitting and it's going to go 0, 1, 2. So we'll just keep it as is. Okay, so why don't we give this a shot and see what happens with this split names array function. I'm going to go back in here. Oh, of course, I forgot that this needs to be resized, not just placed in here. So it needs to be declared like this because otherwise we're not going to be able to use this variable inside of that declaration. And what we'll do, we'll just resize that person array. So that should now allow us to use that I as a variable here. So it didn't work. So we need to go check what happened. So I'll just add a breakpoint in here someplace. Let's make sure we bring this back. So I'll do F8 through this to see what happens. Let's just open this person thing to see what's going on in there. So far for the first row, that seems to have done a good job. Pretty good for the second row too. Did I return this? Oh, of course not. So let's just stop this. Let's make sure we actually return that. So I'm going to take this split names array down here after this whole thing is done. And we need to return that. So we'll just make it equal to that person array. Okay, so let's see if I made any other mistakes here. That now worked out. See how one function spills the whole thing. Now I'm curious what's going to happen if we go through like this. Okay, so we got an error here. So once we got this blank in the middle, the whole thing stops working, which is not what we would like to happen. So we need to figure out how we're going to deal with this. So what I'll do, I'll just add a blank in here so I can troubleshoot this. And then I'll add a breakpoint to see how we're going to deal with that blank. So I'll just open this, hit enter. See, it goes to the breakpoint. Now let's just open this person, this, and let's see what happens when we do F8 through this. So this is the first person. So far, so good. We got through that. Now let's see what happens now. So that line ran. Let's see if this runs. So at this point, name count is -1. See here? It was a blank right here. Okay. Now it gets to this line, and that's where it fails, right in this line, because it's trying to access this 0 position and it doesn't exist. So let's just make a quick fix here. We'll just do if that name count is greater or equal to 0, then, because otherwise it was like -1, then it's going to try to do this. Let's see what happens now. This is still in debug mode, but let's just check. So far it's not erroring on me. So let's just look inside of this array. See, this first one opened just fine. The second one is all empty. The third one is filling up right now. So I'm just gonna stop this, remove this breakpoint. Let's go back and see what happens. Here we go. So now no errors. This works, gives us the right thing. We can go and highlight something like this. And that should just spill the whole array down like that. And that's how you create a function that returns a spill array. So at this point, if you wanted a better name, you could just get rid of that other function right here and replace it with this one. Like that. And a lot of error handling would be nice here. You could check this range first to make sure it has just one column of values instead of multiple columns, because if it had multiple columns, it would not be accurate. You might also want to cast whatever value it is right in here in the cell to a string, just to make sure you're dealing with text. Actually, I'm going to do that here. I'm going to do CSTR just to cast it as a string, just in case, that value. Some extra error handling for this function would be nice. But overall, that should give you the logic how you go about building something like this. And now this is called split names without array. See, I got an error, and that's probably because I forgot to rename the return right here. Let's go back, make sure this still works. And that should be it for this video. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.